Hi, I'm Bill Ward from NCS. I'm also going to be presenting with Grady Wilburn from NCS, one of my colleagues. We want to show you how data from the National Assessment of Educational Progress, also known as NAEP, can be used to examine students' social and emotional well-being, not only for the nation, but specifically for students in Catholic schools. And as I shared, Grady and I will be sharing some findings from the 2019 NAEP assessment that will provide some relevant insights and go beyond the student data that you may be familiar with in NAEP. Before we get into all that, I'm going to provide an overview of the National Assessment of Educational Progress. So what is NAEP? So it's administered by the National Center for Education Statistics within the U.S. Department of Education. It's congressionally mandated and serves as an integral part of our nation's evaluation of the condition and progress of education. And since 1969, NAEP has provided a common measure of student achievement across the country in a variety of subjects, such as math, reading, science, writing, economics, the arts, technology, and engineering as some examples. And NAEP is regarded as the gold standard of large-scale assessment due to its challenging and high-quality assessment content and rigorous design and methodology. Talk a little bit about NAEP's program goals. So we hope to inform educators, researchers, policymakers, and other stakeholders about the condition and progress of academic education in the United States. We track trends in student performance over time, and we provide meaningful and useful comparisons across states and jurisdictions. We also report on group-level student performance across broad areas of knowledge and skills, and we serve as a leader in large-scale assessments and take a leading role in innovation by being on the cutting edge of technology-based assessments. So who participates in NAEP? So NAEP has been traditionally administered to 4th, 8th, and 12th graders in public and private schools across the country. Assessments, as I mentioned, are given a variety of subjects. Math, reading, science, writing, again, are some examples. So NAEP reports on national results for all assessments and subjects. And we also have reading and math results for public schools, for states in the 27 TUDA districts. So these are districts that participate in the trial urban district assessment. In addition to overall results for students, NAEP also reports results for certain groups of students based on their race, ethnicity, gender, eligibility for the National School Lunch Program, parents' education level, disability status, and status as an English language learner. And assessment results are also reported based on community and school factors such as region of the country, school location, including city, suburb, town, and rural, and school type, including public and private, including Catholic schools specifically or charter schools. And it's important to note that we can't report data at these levels without adequate participation of schools and students. Because of Catholic schools' participation over the years, we are able to share these results with you today. So with that background, let's take a quick look at the type of NAEP results that you are most likely familiar with, achievement results. So here we're looking at average mathematics scores over the last 30 years or so for students in 4th and 8th grade. Looking first at the score for 4th graders, you'll see the trend lines go back to 1990 for students in public schools, Catholic schools, and other private schools. And a few things stand out. The gains in scores since the early 1990s, the statistically higher scores for 4th graders in Catholic schools compared to their peers in public schools. But the trend line for students in other private schools stops around the year 2000. Unfortunately, we haven't had enough non-Catholic private schools participate in the assessment to be able to report results since 2003. Now, looking at the mathematics results for 8th graders, we see many of the same trends. In both grades, students in Catholic schools have consistently outperformed their peers in public schools. You'll also notice that there's been a decline in scores over the last decade. To put these scores in context, NAEP has a series of achievement levels to show the percentage of students performing at or above NAEP's definition for basic, proficient, and advanced performance. And in both Catholic and public schools, students are on average performing in the NAEP basic range of achievement for mathematics. Now let's turn to reading scores. And we see many of the same themes we see for mathematics, with students in Catholic schools outperforming their peers in public schools, and the trend line for students in private schools stopping near the year 2000. The difference in reading is a slower rate of progress over time, with scores only increasing by a few points between 1992 and 2019. For 8th graders in Catholic schools, scores were actually not significantly different in 2019 compared to what they were in 1992. So with that, I'm now going to pass the presentation over to my colleague, Dr. Grady Wilburn. Grady is part of NAEP's reporting team, and he's going to walk you through some of the tools we have to look at performance, as well as the specific results for students' social and emotional well-being.
That was a great overview of the trends we've been seeing in math and reading performance for students in Catholic schools. Like Bill said, I wanted to introduce you all and take a quick minute to show you one of our interactive dashboards. The public, private, and charter schools dashboard is available at nationsreportcard.gov, and it lets you easily access and compare results for students in different types of schools, different demographics, and I'll show you some of those variables in a moment. But you can use it to compare students' achievements, educational experiences, and like I mentioned, demographics. So let me give you a quick demo of the tool to show you how you can do that and show some of the things that Bill was just talking about. So here you see the public, private, and charter school dashboard, again, available at nationsreportcard.gov. And what this dashboard does is it compares the performance across all of the different subjects that you see here, all the different NAEP assessments for these different school types, public, private, and charter schools. We have different student group options here. I'm going to focus on all students, but if you did want to look at race, ethnicity, gender, NSLP eligibility, parent eds, et cetera, you see all those different options in your student group box here. And by default, average scores are selected. But if you did want to look at it by different achievement levels, which I'm going to do, like at or above NAEP proficient, you see those options right there. So let's take a look at reading to see what we get. And so here again, you see grade 4, grade 8, and grade 12. And then the bars within each of those grades represent the dark blue is public, slightly lighter blue is public charter. You see that there's a dash here for all the private school results for grade 4 and 8, and then a dash for both private and private Catholic in grade 12. And that's just because the reporting standards aren't met, meaning that we didn't get enough participation to actually report reliable performance for those school types. This is why participation is important, something else that Bill mentioned. But what you see here in grade 4 is that 34% of students, this is reading, were at or above proficient in 2019, compared to 31% for public charter, 50% for Catholic schools. And you see a similar story here for grade 8, 32% versus 30 versus 48 for Catholic. And again, we don't have those data reportable for either private or Catholic in 2019 for grade 12. And so it's a very user-friendly dashboard. I'm just scrolling down a little bit to look at other options you could do with the this dashboard. It's meant to be user-friendly. You can print reports out. You can save reports. So when you get a chance, do yourself a favor and just play around with it a little bit. It's a great way of understanding performance across these 3 different school types. Okay, so now what we're going to do is dive into some NAEP data from the student and school questionnaires from the 2019 grade 8 report cards. Specifically, I want to discuss the percentage of students who reported feeling happy at school, awkward or out of place, and confident in their knowledge and skills. Given the current conversation around students' mental health, given the disruption in schools caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, we thought it would be interesting to share these with you all as these kind of indicators of well-being in 2019. And the cool part is that we plan on asking these questions again in the next NAEP administration in 2022. And so we'll have some key pre and post-pandemic insights into these matters. And please note that while we are only going to be discussing the 8th grade results on the screen today, similar NAEP data can be found for other grades, grades 4 and grade 12 online. And at the end of this presentation, I'm going to show you how to explore even more data online. Very briefly, I think it's important to explain how we collect this information. The insights that we're about to share, they come from a part of the NAEP that you may not be familiar with. I call it the gold mine of NAEP data, and it's the NAEP survey questionnaires. Every sample student that participates, their teacher, the student, their teacher, and school administrators, they answer a very brief survey that helps us provide information about students' opportunities to learn, both in and outside of the classroom, help explain how different factors are related to student performance, and allow for meaningful comparisons between student groups. And you can examine findings based on the percentage of students who have different educational experiences, as we'll do in a moment. And you can examine the relationships between those experiences and students' academic achievement. And I say relationships carefully because it's very important to remember that student achievement is a reflection of many factors. And you all, I'm sure, as educators understand that just because there's a relationship between achievement and a single variable, it doesn't mean necessarily that changing that variable will also change achievement. You all have heard the phrase correlation cannot be confused with causation. If you had it, you heard it today. But still, examining the relationships across several related variables can be informative. So the first student disposition we're going to look at is how often did students across the US report feeling happy at school? Students answering this question were asked to report whether they feel happy at school. Never or hardly ever, less than half of the time, about half of the time, more than half of the time, or all or most of the time. And so here we see those results for 8th graders in public schools on the left and Catholic schools on the right. So let's first focus on the dark blue and gold bars, which reflects the percentages of students who reported feeling happy more than half the time and all or most of the time. All or most of the time being in the dark blue, more than half of the time being in the gold bars. In both cases, again, public schools on the left, Catholic schools on the right, a larger percentages of students reported feeling happy in Catholic schools than in public schools. And that's denoted by those little asterisks you see there, which reflect statistical significant differences. Conversely, smaller percentages of students in Catholic schools reported feeling happy less than half of the time, or never or hardly ever. That's at the bottom of these bars, less than half of the time being in the, I'm not good with colors, I'll call that teal, and never or hardly ever being in the gray at the very bottom. Again, those asterisks meaning that they are statistically different from public school. So the question you're probably asking is then, how does this relate to achievement in NAEP mathematics? And so what you see in Catholic schools, students who reported feeling happy more than half of the time, that's the bar that's denoted in gold, they scored higher in math than students who reported feeling happy less of the time or never or hardly ever. Again, that is indicated by those asterisks you see there next to the number 281 on the very far left and 287 just next to that. And while this next finding is not reflected on this bar, we do see similar trends for students across the nations. 8th graders in public and private schools who report feeling happy more than half the time. They score higher than math on average than students who reported feeling happy less often. And I will also say that this is a finding not only across grades, but it's a finding across subjects. So with that in mind, let's look again at the percentage of Catholic 8th graders who reported feeling happy at school. And so we asked this question in 2017 and in 2019. Now we know 2 data points don't yet define a trend, but you can see a statistically larger percentage of students who reported never or hardly ever feeling happy in 2019 and in 2017 indicated they're on the far left, and a statistically smaller percentage of students who reported feeling happy all or most of the time. These changes, this kind of change from 17 to 19 of students reporting feeling happy all and most of the time, declining a little bit, with students reporting feeling happy never or hardly ever increasing. This isn't unique to Catholic schools. This is something that we saw nationally in combined results for students in public schools and private schools in general. And so again, I just want to reiterate that we intend to ask these questions again in 2022. So it'll be very interesting to see if and how these results change within the context of this current COVID-19 pandemic. The second item that looks at students' disposition that we wanted to share focused on how often do students report across the US feeling awkward and out of place at school. Similar to the answer categories for the previous question about feeling happy, they were asked to report this never or hardly ever, less than half the time, about half of the time, more than half of the time, or all or most of the time. Similar display to what we just saw a moment ago. Once again, we see the results for 8th graders in public schools on the left, Catholic schools on the right. And we're going to focus on the bottom of the bars, looking at the dark blue and gold bars, which reflect the percentage of students who report feeling awkward or out of place less than half the time and never or hardly ever. And so what you see when we focus on the dark blue in particular is that a larger percentage of students in Catholic schools than public schools reported that they felt awkward, never or hardly ever, at a higher rate than public school students. Conversely, smaller percentages of students in Catholic schools reported feeling awkward more than half the time or all or most of the time compared to their peers in public schools. And so you're seeing more Catholic students reporting never or hardly ever feeling awkward, and you're seeing less students in Catholic schools reporting feeling awkward all or most of the time or more than half the time. To see how this related to performance, again, just correlation. In Catholic schools, students who reported feeling awkward less than half of the time, that's the bar that you see in gold, they scored higher in mathematics than students who reported feeling awkward about half the time or all the most of the time. Again, that's indicated by the asterisks there next to the numbers 287 and 284. While not reflecting on this size, we see similar trends for students across the nation. 8th graders who report feeling awkward and out of place less than half the time or never or hardly ever, they score higher in math on average than students who reported feeling awkward, out of the place more often. And again, this finding is pretty consistent across grades and subjects. And what this is showing us is we are essentially seeing the other side of the coin, right? For the results that we saw for students who reported feeling happy at school, adding to our understanding of the relationship between these variables and achievement. Now let's look at the percentages a slightly different way. In addition to seeing how results change over time, we are able to examine how they vary for different groups of students. So on this slide, for example, we're looking at how the findings vary for male and female students. Among 8th graders in Catholic schools, you can see that a larger percentage of male students, that's the dark bar, than female students, the gold bar, reported never or hardly ever feeling awkward or out of place in schools. At the other end of the spectrum, a larger percentage of female students, almost 1 in 5, reported feeling awkward or out of place at school more than half the time or all or most of the time. Again, similar trends across the nation when we combine results for students in public and private schools. And you all probably have a much better idea of what may drive these feelings among students or what they consider when they are answering these questions. But our goal is just to be a resource of data for you as you consider issues such as these. We hope it would be helpful for you all to kind of have a national barometer to consider what's happening nationally and then extrapolate to what's going on in your individual schools. For the last item, we're going to switch to findings from the 2019 reading assessment and look at how confident were students across the US in their reading knowledge and skills. And these findings reflect combined results for several related survey questions, and we refer to this as an index variable. As part of the 2019 grade 8 reading assessment, students were asked questions about confidence. They think they would be able to do several things when it comes to reading, including explaining the meaning of something you have read, figure out the main idea of the text, critique an author's craft or technique, recognizing the difference between fact and opinion. There's about 9 or 10 items that make up this confidence index. And I encourage you all to go to the Nation's Report Card.gov and look at this report to look at all the items. But for each of these activities, students' response options included, I definitely can't, I probably can't, maybe, I probably can, or I definitely can, right? So different options along the spectrum of indicating confidence with doing all the different items we asked in this confidence index. And students' responses to these prompts were then grouped into this overall index of their confidence level in reading knowledge skills, ranging from low to medium to high. So this is slightly different from some of the variables and that we just discussed a moment ago, and that this is the index of several variables. So turning to the findings, we once again see the results for 8th graders in public schools on the left and Catholic schools on the right. Let's again focus on the dark blue and gold bars, which now reflect the percentage of students whose responses demonstrated moderate and high levels of confidence in their reading skills. In both cases, larger percentages of students had moderate and high levels of confidence in Catholic schools than in public schools, as denoted again by the asterisk, which reflects those differences. Only 2% of Catholic 8th graders at the very bottom had low levels of confidence, again, based on their responses. That's compared to 5% for public school students. All right, so how did confidence in reading relate to average reading scores? So in Catholic schools, 8th graders with high levels of confidence outscored their peers with a moderate level of confidence. So the more confident you were, the higher you performed on this. Again, this is 8th grade reading. The percentage of students with low confidence was so small, as you saw on the previous slides, is about 2%. And when the percent is so small, it's hard to create a reliable scale score estimate. And so when that happens, you see the double dagger as indicated on your slide. And so we weren't able to generate an average score for that 2% of students. So similar to how we disaggregated the data by gender earlier, you can also examine these variables based on students' race or ethnicity. And so here we're looking at how the findings for students' reading confidence varied for white, Black, and Hispanic 8th graders in Catholic schools. And what you see is there's no difference in confidence levels across Black, Hispanics, and white students. So there's no difference in confidence when you look at 8th graders in Catholic schools. But this is a time when these results are different than the trend nationally. So when you look at the national estimate, and that's all public school students combined with private school students, what you see is that smaller percentages of Black and Hispanic students report high confidence compared to white students. And so white students report a higher level of confidence nationally than Black or Hispanic students, but we don't find that when we're looking at just 8th graders in Catholic schools. So now that we've shown you all these data, and you're probably chomping at the bit to figure out how you could do this yourself, the last part of this presentation is going to demonstrate how you can dig into these analyses on your own using the NAEP Data Explorer. And you may hear me call it the NDE, but this is an acronym for the NAEP Data Explorer. And so we're going to switch our focus area for this demonstration and take a look at teachers' social and emotional well-being. They're just as much being impacted by this current COVID-19 pandemic, I would say, as students may be. And so we're going to particularly look in the area of how well they feel supported by other teachers at their school. So the NAEP Data Explorer, just to quickly introduce the tool before we go there, is a tool we have used to run all the analyses that we've shown you here today. You can use the Data Explorer to see the results of specific assessments across multiple years and broken down for the reporting groups we've discussed, as well as many others. It will generate tables and graphs. It will run significance tests. It'll let you put it in a Twitter, in a tweet, in a post if you want to, all sorts of wonderful functions, including being able to export your findings into a Word, Excel, or PDF format. So why don't we get started? All right, so the NAEP Data Explorer, if I didn't say it already, it can be found at nationsreportcard.gov. And again, what it is, it holds all the data we've collected and it allows you to do some of the analyses that we just discussed, we just shared with you. So I'm gonna look at reading grade 8. And for the jurisdiction, I'm just gonna do national, all right? Let's go ahead and enter the main NAEP Data Explorer. I agree. And so you see those options that I just selected, they populate here for us, including the jurisdiction. Now, what I want to be able to show you is how to do what we call a crosstab so that you can see some of these teacher variables. I think we're going to talk about teacher support by the different school types. And so you want to make sure you have national checked up here. And then you want to go down to our variable. And this is where you're going to find all of the variables that our students, that our teachers, and that the schools were asked. All right. So first thing we're going to look at is school type. And so I just know that I can go to school factors here and I can select public or non-public school. So I'm going to check that box. And then when you see the little view details, you can see the different options that's going to come out when we do that analysis. The other question that I mentioned I wanted to look at was teacher support. And so I'm going to go down here to where it says teacher factors. And then for the subcategory, I'm going to look at the teacher support subcategory. And so there are several different items that we ask teachers about teacher support. But the one that I am particularly interested in is this item down here, which asks teachers, how much does each of the following statements apply to you as a teacher? I am supported by the teachers at my school. And then you see all the different answer options there. We're going to focus on those answer options in a moment after I pull these data. Okay, so after you selected, you can go up here where it says show selected variables, and you can see the items that you selected. And then you want to do is create a crosstab. So I'm just going to click right here where it says create crosstab. And again, you see the variables that we selected. All right. So since we want to combine these two variables together, that's what a crosstab essentially does. You're going to check both of those boxes. And then you're just going to name the variable. I'm going to name this school type by support. All right. I'm going to click create. I'm going to submit it. And then what our tool does is at the bottom of your page, you see the analysis that we just chose. So here's the school variable that we just created right here. Okay. And the last thing you want to do before you create the report is under statistic, you have different options here. Average scores is going to be selected by default so that you can see how students performed with teachers that made those different selections. But if you can also check percentages, so you can see, if you recall the slides that we talked about a moment ago, you can also see the percent of Catholic school students, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is where you'd want to select those options under the statistics function there. All right, and so I'm just going to create the report. And we see that variable, we see that analysis right here. I'm going to show the report data. And sometimes it can take a while. Sometimes it doesn't, like it did right now. And so you see our findings, right? And so we see school type here, public, other, private, Catholic, Bureau of Indian Education, Department of Defense. But then you also see the answer selections that the teachers had when asked a question if they feel supported by teachers at their school. And so let's focus on public, which is this first line, and Catholic, which is this third line. I've already explained the double dagger, such a small percentage we couldn't create a reliable estimate. But if you look at performance, what you see when you compare public to Catholic, that Catholic school, students in Catholic schools across the board, this is 8th grade reading, regardless of the answer option the teacher selected, seem to be performing higher than their public school counterparts. What you'll also notice if you focus on the percentages here is that 63% of students have teachers who indicated that the phrase, I feel supported by teachers at my school, that is exactly like them. 63% of Catholic school students have teachers that said that, compared to 43% of public school students. And you can make those same statements across the line. 21% of students have Catholic school teachers versus 36% of public school students, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then last thing I want to point out is you can see the relationship with performance. It looks like it's pretty flat for public school students. And it looks like it jumps up and down a little bit for Catholic school students. But I think that's great that you have 63% of students that have teachers that reported that they feel that the teachers support them at their school. So if you did want to see whether these scale scores or these percentages were actually statistically different from each other, if you recall, we had indicated with asterisk on the slide, then you go up here and you can just create a significance test. I'm not going to go through that right now, but you can just click the button, choose the variables that you want to check or indicate for significance, and then it'll spit out a data table that just shows you whether or not one category is different from another category. And so that's definitely something that you may want to look at to be able to talk about these percentages in terms of one is higher or lower or not different from the other one. I hope you guys found this interesting. It's always a good time sharing these tools with those who I think could use it. Please make sure you look for NAEP in the virtual exhibit hall. I hope you all found this helpful and you enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you.